Hi students, let's look at how do we find the rules of a number sequence, and using this rule, how can we find out the next two terms? So let's look at question 2 and 3, because these are some examples of questions which involve these concepts. So I have wrote down some tips on the right side of the screen over here. So this can help us or help you to give you some guides on how do we apply this method to find the rules of the term, and after that find the next two terms. So first thing, let's highlight some keywords of the questions. So in question 2, they say that write down the next two terms of each of the number sequence. But before we can find the next two terms, we need to first identify what is the rule in each number sequence. So once you have found out the rule, then you can find out the next two terms. So let's look at question 2a. So for question 2a, right, let's apply the tips on the rest of the screen. So let's find a pattern between first and second number. And for each number sequence, right, any operator is possible. For example, they can add a number for each of the subsequent term, or they can subtract, they can multiply, or they can divide. And after that, you need to check that whether when you discover this first term, this rule, does this same rule apply for the rest of the term or not? So if it doesn't apply, right, that means you need to try again. And the last question is, how do we know that whether a rules involve subtraction or division? So some questions to guide you along. So what happens when you subtract or divide a number? Does this number get bigger or smaller after each term? So these are some questions for you to think about. Okay, so let's question 2a. So for question 2a, right, from the first from term in the first position to the term in the second position, there seems to be a plus 4. So I think that the rule is plus 4. So how do I confirm? I check with the next two term. So for the second to the third, also plus 4. And let me check whether this rule apply for every single term for the next few terms. So also plus 4, also plus 4. So after I see this same rule being applied for the rest of the term, I can confirm that for this number sequence, the rule is plus 4. So in order for me to find the next two term, it will be plus 4 to 19, which is 23, and plus 4 to 23, which is 27. So this is my next two term. So let's look at the next one, 2b. So for 2b, right, let's check. From the first term to the second term, there seems to be a plus 4. And for the second term to the third term, there seems to be a plus 12. After that, plus how many? 36. Then you notice that there doesn't seem to be a pattern if I use plus. So maybe I can try out times. So one question to ask is, how come I don't go into minus or divide? Why do I go into times straight away instead of minus and divide? So what is something that I notice in this pattern that tell me that it must be plus or multiply, not minus or divide? Okay, so if you notice, the number is getting bigger. So when the number is getting bigger, right, minus a number or dividing a number is not really that possible. Okay, so now let's check for another pattern. So if I consider times, right, let me erase. So normally when you do number pattern, it's good for you to write using a pencil for the testing rule. So once you have finalized the real testing, then you can write in pen. So let's try times 3, because I know that 2 times 3 equals 6. And 6 times what give you 18? Oh, times 3 also. And 18 times what give you 54? 54. Oh, times 3 also. So you notice that, so for this rule over here is times 3. So for my next two term, it will be times 3 as well. So 162 times 3, which is how much? Which is 486. So 486 times 3, what will it be? 1458. So this is my next two term. So let's go to the one in part D. So for the one in part D, right, before I go into anything, let's look at the number first. Is the number increasing or decreasing? That means is it getting bigger or is it getting smaller? So I believe you have seen that this number sequence here, the numbers are getting smaller. So when it's getting smaller, I can consider minus or divide. So let's say I try minus 144, minus 72, minus 36, minus 18. And when I check the minus, right, I notice that it's like subtracting the same number. So when you're subtracting the same number, right, there's only one possibility, which is divide. Because 2a divided by 2 give you 144, and 144 divided by 2 give you 72, and 72 divided by 2 give you 36, 36 divided by 2 give you 18. So when you are subtracting by half the number, that means you're actually dividing by 2, dividing by half. So you're actually dividing by 2. So you divide by 2, divide by 2, divide by 2, divide by 2. So that means my next two term will be 18 divided by 2, which is 9, and 9 divided by 2, which is 4.5. So someone will ask, this number here is a fraction or is a decimal. So does it mean that the numbers in my number pattern, it can be decimal or it can be in fraction? Yes, it can be. But you need to look at the context of the question. So if let's say the questions involve some shapes like triangle and stuff, and you know that we cannot have half a triangle, then you need to check your answers. So let's look at question 3. So for question 3, right, they say also the same thing. Let's look at the next two terms for each of the sequence. So let's check. So when I go from the first term to the second term, is minus 1. When I go to the second term to the third term, it seems to be plus 3. When I go to the third term to the fourth term, it seems to be minus 1. When I go to the fourth term to the fifth term, it's plus 3. So do you see any pattern? I believe you did. So for the next two term, you will have to restart over from minus 1. So 14 minus 1 is 13. And the seventh term, it will be 13 plus 3, which is 16. So sometimes your number patterns, right, it can be a little bit complex also. That means it can have more than one rule being applied to the number sequence. So in question 2, right, all the number pattern there, they only consist of one single rule. For example, for 2a is plus 4 all the way, for 2b is times 3 all the way, and for part D is all divide. But for 3a, right, it's a combination of minus and plus. So this is also possible. So let's look at part B. So for part B, right, from the first to the second is plus 1. From the second to the third is plus 4. From the third to the fourth, it's plus 5. And from the fifth to the sixth, no, from the fourth to the fifth is plus 7. Is there any pattern? Mm, don't think so. So that means you need to consider other ways. So let's try other way. Okay, so if some of you notice there's an error there, so it should be plus 9. So once you change it to plus 9, then you notice that the addition of the number seems to be following the numbers in the number sequence. 1, 4, 5, 9. That means my next two term will be plus 14 and plus 23. So my next term, take 23 plus 14, which is 37, and 37 plus 23, which is 60. So these are my next two terms of the number sequence. So let's look at the part D. So part D, right? Let's check. Okay, so first thing I notice that all the numbers are increasing. So that means that my number pattern will not involve minus or divide. So that's the first thing to check. Whether are they increasing or decreasing? Or is there a mixture? So x plus 1 plus 4 so it's plus 1 and plus 9. It seems to be having a pattern there. So for the second to the third term, I'm adding the same number of the second term. And for the fourth term to the fifth term, I'm adding back 9, which is the fourth term. So I can say that my next two term, it will be plus 1 first. Let me draw my arrow properly. So you can see better. It's plus 1, plus 4, plus 1, plus 9. So next one will be plus 1. The next one will be plus. The number in the sixth term. So when you're adding the same number, right, you're actually multiplying by 2. So 18 plus 1